You are listening to the Yoga for Balance podcast. I'm your host, Heather Gjerde. Thank you for being here. This week, I have Luke Wientzen on the show. Luke has been studying the complexity, paradox, and mystery of this human existence through the lenses of yoga, breath, and meditation since 2003. He shares what he has directly experienced as beneficial, healing, and empowering in a dynamic blend of breathing techniques, mindful movement, and introspective practices. He believes in approaching life with a beginner's mind to cultivate presence and deep compassion, and ultimately to live from the heart. In this conversation, we talk about how this once reluctant surfer found his way to his first yoga class, what that journey looked like from there on out, and how it did lead to an injury that really transformed his practice into a deeper focus on the meditation aspect as well as breath work. He discusses Anusara Yoga, as well as multiple approaches that he's explored when it comes to the breath as well as the meditation side of things. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Luke. Hello and welcome to the show, Luke Wientzen.
Thank you for having me, Heather.
Since Luke is going to talk to us today about breathwork, I thought he would be the one to open us up with our nice deep breath to sort of settle into the Yoga for Balance show. So Luke, why don't you lead us off?
Okay, well, find a comfortable seat and you can close your eyes and you can relax your face. And as you relax your face, notice that you have the ability to drop into and relax your belly. And then once you feel those sensations sink down, take a breath in through your nose without making any sound. Notice how your body fills up, and then let it go without making any sound, like a bubble popped. And then make a little bit of sound and still breathe low into your low belly. And then you can open your mouth and don't make any sound, but let the breath go. And just notice how your body has this subtle control over letting go, and then make a little more sound breathing in through your nose. And then make a slight sighing sound as you breathe out. There you go. And notice how you feel. And notice the breath. A little bit more animated and obvious now.
Thank you, Luke. And we'll get a little more into the breath work and what Luke does and what I've experienced with him here on the show. But first, I wanted to take a step back and have Luke describe your experience of yoga, what brought you into this world, and yeah, take us a little bit down the journey to here now, 2020.
Cool. What brought me into this world? That's a good way to start that question. My mother obviously brought me into this world. But my journey with yoga very much relates to my journey with my upbringing and growing up. And there's a little anecdote I like to give about this. I was raised in Northern Virginia in the Washington, D.C. area, and I was raised Catholic. And I went to Catholic school growing up. And I had a lot of questions from an early age, from probably when I was 7 or 8 years old, when I was being taught and told and kind of like shoved down my throat these concepts about God and heaven and hell. And it was inexperiential for me. It was informational and conceptual, but never something that I directly felt I was experiencing or seeing or finding in that way. So I always kind of pondered it. And I had a bedroom upstairs in this house my parents still live in Arlington, Virginia. And I remember being very awake for many years at night, late, and looking out my bedroom window where my bed was. And we had these 3 oak trees in our yard. And I remember I would see the sky then. There wasn't a lot of light pollution where I lived. And I could see the sky and I could see the expansiveness of the sky. And a lot of the time from maybe age 8 until I was through high school, I just would wonder, what is this whole thing? What's out there? This thing is so big, and there's all this, stuff about God and these rules that I'm supposed to follow. but where is that out there? You know, it's like so big out there. What's out? What is out there? What is all that? And and there was never any answers. You know, there was peace in the feeling out there, but never Christ or the Mary coming to me or anything like that, or God making it very obvious what God might very well be. And then I went to college in South Carolina, in Charleston, South Carolina. I started surfing there. I went and lived for a year in mainland Mexico in a town called Puerto Escondido that has incredible waves. I taught English at that school. That was enough where I knew I was going to move to California. I'd never experienced yoga. I knew about yoga maybe just barely, but I never had experienced it. I actually knew about yoga then because Madonna kind of popularized it at a certain point, and Saturday Night Live made fun of her for popularizing it.
Nice.
Yeah. And then I moved out here in 2000. In February of 2003 is when I got here to San Diego, and it wasn't for about another year until I had a colleague at the high school that I was teaching at, who I was carpooling with, a woman named Lacey, and she and I were going to surf after work one day, and the surf was blown out, and she said, "You should come with me to yoga." And I said, I kind of resisted, and I said, like, "No, I'm good. Like that's like for pregnant women." Right? And she goes, "No, it's a surfer's flow class. You'd love it. And there's a lot of guys that go, a lot of surfers." And that sparked my interest. I had done like a Taylor Knox as a pro surfer, and Rochelle Ballard, I think they had like a video out, and it was like these basic poses. I think I had seen it and done a few things with a friend of mine who had it on, but not taking it seriously, right? Prior to that, it was the only time I'd ever experienced stuff. And when I was a kid, by the way, like stretching in gym class was not cool. You know, I was not into it. So we went to a class that was at the original Bird Rock Yoga studio, and Jonathan Patriarca was the name of the teacher. He's passed, bless his heart. We got in. Basically, it was like an Ashtanga hybrid, you know, Vinyasa style flow class. And the two things that were apparent for me immediately was it was dark in the room, and that was comforting, right? It was candlelit. There was a lot of guys in the room. It was fast moving. I was shocked at how good it felt to move that way and how much movement it entailed versus like I thought it was going to be holding poses and very unpleasant. There was aspects of it being unpleasant, like how tight my hips and hamstrings were. And all these things, the amount that I started sweating, I was kind of mesmerized by, like, whoa, this is awesome. And then I started to get a very euphoric buzz from it. And then the class ended in Shavasana. And I laid down in Shavasana next to my friend Lacey in this packed room, candlelit room, and this guy, Jonathan, and I was just eyes open, kind of like, what was that? I've never experienced something like that, like as a workout or anything. And this guy, Jonathan, came over to me, and he I remember he tapped my right shoulder, and he just said, like, close your eyes. It's okay. You can close your eyes. And it was I could call it a mystical experience. As soon as I closed my eyes, inside of my body, I could see the exact same view and feel that I had from my whole youth in my parents' house when I looked up through those trees into the universe, into the sky. And I immediately recognized that that's in me. It's never been outside of me. And I had so much more to work through, like that, you know, like these locked conceptual things about what was God and all this, you know, needing to achieve something or to behave a certain way for punishment or reward bullshit stuff that Catholicism had, kind of programmed me with. And yeah, so that was my initiation into yoga. And at that point I knew like, this is monumental in my life. And, I began practicing there with like, conviction. And, I met Maral Hadidi. I love her. She's my first yoga teacher. She's still today a very close friend and, a wonderful human being. That the pathway of yoga as a physical practice kind of like almost took priority for many number of years for me over surfing. I would choose to go and do a yoga practice with priority over going to surf, even though I was initially using yoga like, wow, this is going to really open my body up to be surfing better. And I noticed an impact on not just surfing, but anything I did physically from practicing, and a greater body awareness, and more tone, flexibility, and all these beautiful byproducts of having an asana practice. So that was what, like 2004, I guess, is where it kind of really started. And then by 2008, I decided to do a training. And it was in a vinyasa school, kind of an industrial approach with yoga. And then after that, I kind of was sort of very high on yoga and very in an exploratory phase. And I found Anusara Yoga through recommendation. I found a Michael Fukumura class when he was teaching at a studio in Solana Beach called Hot Yoga. And as soon as I could hold a handstand for a minute and a half, and I thought I had a deep, my heels were down in down dog, right? And I could do a real active practice. But when I went into Michael's class, I recognized immediately, like, oh my God, so I have no idea. I'm such a novice, and there's so much for me to learn about my body and alignment and energy and currents of energy and purpose behind using yoga asana as a tool to be in the body and ultimately to lead in the direction of self awareness, right? So that was really like the massive turning point for me in terms of like learning yoga and then teaching yoga was when I did this year-long Anusara class training with Michael, and I got to practice with John Friend a lot then, who was on fire with his teaching, and he was the founder of Anusara Yoga at that time. And I was just hyper inspired by it. It kind of like revolutionized how I saw the body and how I could read bodies. And some of the things that really like grabbed me about Anusara was that it had this perspective. It had these five principles of alignment called universal principles of alignment. It would take a long time to explain them all, but essentially they were in order: open to grace, muscle energy, inner spiral, outer spiral, organic or bone energy, right? And in a typical Anusara class, a certified Anusara teacher would weave in two of these in relation to a larger theme that related to life off the yoga mat, but also a physical reference point in terms of opening the corners of the body, and then doing that in the interest of going in the direction of specific advanced postures, right? Mm-hmm. And the kind of postures that I began to like embark on were like so challenging and wild and different that it was really like a test for my body or for any body. So that, it just really changed how I was able to see the practice of yoga from a level that was like fun and flowy and physical to like, whoa, this is structural and this is therapeutic. It can be used therapeutically, and this is very intelligent. And it came from, essentially it was like all yogas. It was a spin-off of one of two schools of yoga, and Anusara was John Friend's interpretation or repackaging and repurposing of Iyengar yoga. Just like a lot of the vinyasa we see around town, really its roots would trace back to Ashtanga. And once I had finished this year training, I just was so high on yoga and interested in learning more that I actually started spending time in New York, and checking out different, master teachers just to get, it was like, I felt like the best analogy is I felt like a kid had walked into a video game arcade and I was like, I'm playing every game in here. And obviously some games are going to be lame and not cool. And some games I'm going to be super into. Some games will be really challenging and just not for me, whatever. But because of that, I basically kind of caused myself some serious injury in my back, because I found a couple of styles of yoga that didn't stress alignment and had components like, very advanced back bending and contortive type things. And or just like very rigorous physical push. No one ever, I didn't think, and nobody ever guided me to say like, what's the point of doing this for your future body, for when you're 60 or 70 or 80? Is this going to benefit that body right now? I was like high on exploring with what is my body capable of doing, or what am I capable of making my body submit to, And that really ended up hurting my low back. And so because of that, I ended up having the good fortune of working with another yoga teacher named Tias Little. And Tias had a very soft and sophisticated approach that was very therapeutic for my needs at the time, about 5 years ago when I was in some serious injuries, 6 years ago. And Tias had a teacher that was a meditation teacher who I went to a retreat with the two of them in Big Sur at Esalen. And as soon I thought, I'll go because my back was really bad at this point. And I thought I'll go because it's Tias and he'll help me heal. And I said, and I'd written him an email and I said, what's up with the Zen teacher? And he said, he sent me this long email about my injuries and how he could help me. And he said, the Zen teacher is brilliant. And when I went there thinking I was going to learn from Tias, as soon as Henry, is the Zen teacher, opened his mouth, I had a very unique emotional response to everything he was saying that was relative to my body and my life and my existence and my path. And that opened up commitment into in being in a Zen training, which has been ongoing and probably will be ongoing the rest of my life. So yoga has been this really wonderful thing, to go back to your question, where it's been this, the word union comes to mind for me. It's brought together the body and the mind and the breath. And to me, that's not just inside of my body and inside of Luke as an individual, but it's inside of the interconnected nature of all things on this planet and in this universe. And I've been so lucky because it's really exposed me to these great and unique and kind of diamonds in the rough modalities, such as various forms of breath work and a couple different approaches with meditation. One which has been really fruitful and beneficial for me, which has been Zen. Yeah.
That's quite the journey, and I love the connection to your childhood and to your first yoga class. And some of those first yoga experiences are the most eye-opening because it's the first time being open to this world. And I was also born and raised Catholic and really found that connection when I found this path that just... it felt more empowering. And like you said, you experience it yourself. So
the experiential piece has been huge. Having direct experience.
Wow. So, and thank you for describing Anusara and the breath work. And I love you sharing also your experience of the injury, because I remember you saying that when I first did the vinyasa training with you. And I think that's a good warning to some people that are, rigorously entering this practice, just wanting to nail the advanced postures they see on Instagram. Ooh, maybe that's not the point to get into that thing before you're ready, or maybe you won't ever be ready for that, or you don't need to go there. And so finding and exploring these different paths that might bring you closer to what you need from the practice versus what you come into it thinking you need.
Yeah, it's funny because, and as I look back, when I was really injured, there was 2 years where I was in chronic pain, hideous pain, where I was taking 3,000 milligrams a day of ibuprofen to stay ahead of the pain, and that wasn't really working, and I was having problems with my stomach because of how much ibuprofen I was having to take. But I wasn't listening to my body and stopping. I was still practicing asana actively and surfing and staying, really busy. And then my back basically kind of crashed on me. And it had been like 3 or 4 years that embedded in my journey with Anusara and asana. I was fascinated by breath practice. And then I was finding that I was leading breath practice I was leading the asana practices. I was teaching with the breath, right, and incorporating various types of pranayamas into the way I was teaching. But and then I had about 5 years of a TM, Transcendental Meditation practice from a teacher, but that never really stuck for me. Or it was a period where I had to wade through a lot of bizarre states like fatigue and boredom and frustration and like this endless mind stuff, like endless entanglement of mind. And anyways, and with the injury, when I really got hurt and my identity as a strong asana teacher for me collapsed, and I recognized like I can't keep teaching. I'm not going to practice this way, so I can't keep teaching that way. That's when the path really began to like the bottom of the bucket began to really kind of crack open and fall out, and the egg was cracked, and what began to happen was things started to show up, like breath work modalities to heal, and using these different modalities to heal, and then from that healing to ask much deeper questions about massive universal, to me, some of the most important questions that I didn't have the evolution at the time prior to ask. Yeah.
So let's talk about breath.
Okay.
So you've brought up quite a few times, how powerful the breath aspect has been for you. And that's something I've experienced with you. I think one of our first experiences, I was taking your classes as well as a breath workshop. And wow, yeah, just the different approaches and how that can take you into different states, prepare you for various things, and just focusing on that alone. So for someone listening that hasn't done a ton of other than Ujjayi breath, pranayama, maybe a little breath of fire, something here or there, but hasn't done a ton of focused breath work, what to you is the power of breath as a tool for transformation? And what are some of the different approaches that you take, and how has that evolved for you?
Well, okay, so there's so many directions I could go, but I will say this, that like to personalize it, when I was practicing asana, like really with conviction and a lot of vinyasa, I definitely found that there was a way that I could differentiate between a quality practice and one that that wasn't great, based on how connected to the breath I got. And a lot of times that was a teacher. Some teachers were able to do it. Some teachers just didn't cue it. A lot of times it was my own mood or the time of the day I was taking and practicing. But I knew once I started teaching, like this is an area where I'm going to have focus. Like I want to deliver this to people because I think that's always there, And I started studying kind of pranayama approaches with breath. Specifically, there's a book by a guy named Doug Keller, who's a wonderful teacher. Do Yoga is his brand or website. And Richard Rosen, The Yoga of Breath. And I read those two books, and they had such perspective and information and knowledge on the body and the diaphragm, or diaphragms and the lungs, and then currents of energy. And then I started to kind of just start seeing breath differently. And then a close friend of mine, my brother Gerson, who is a Dharma Mitra teacher, in the summer of 2012, he started to take me through breathing routines. And they were traditional classic like pranayama approaches, like, doing long periods of nadi shodhana, of alternate nostril breathing, and learning Kapalabhati and Vastrika, and seeing what like extended periods of this did, and what kind of responses they elicited. And I was in pain then, and he came, we were in Puerto Escondido actually for a couple months. And he was there with his now wife, and I was there on a surf trip, and I couldn't really practice asana, and he was teaching asana workshops, and he was such a good human that he came by and he did breath practice with me. And that's when it really snapped of like, when I do this as a practice alone, without like outside of the context of asana, I feel as good as I do when I had a really good asana practice. Mm-hmm. Right? So there was a big indicator for me of like, pay more attention and study this more seriously. And so this is when I started to really delve into the study. And then to back it up, before I'd ever done a training, Maral Hadidi in, I think it was 2004, in fact, I know I'm weird with dates. It was March of 2005. Moral invited me to a breathwork workshop, a transformational breathwork workshop at the original Bird Rock Yoga in Bird Rock. And it was with a woman named Judith Kravitz, and it was a small group thing. It was on a Saturday afternoon, and it was a potluck thing. And Judith brought us through this whole experience where we got together, we held hands. There was only like a dozen people there. We had to state what our intention was, and she said, like, you got to lean into the positive. So if you want to get rid of anger, and this, I'm just saying what my thing was, what I identified. She said, if you want to get rid of anger, you don't say, I want to get rid of anger. You say what the outcome of getting rid of anger was, right? And so I thought about it for a minute, and I said, I want to have like a very deep experience of peace. And then we went through this connected breathing pattern, which at the time was a 2-part inhale. So it was like belly, chest out. Like, I think an analogy is like the We Will Rock You beat, by Queen. So that with breath, like that, right? And you're laying down, and it was Judith and a couple workers, and they went around the room. And at this point, I'd never had any breathwork experience. I'd only been doing Ujjayi breathing and maybe a little bit of other soft pranayama approach from Moral. And within 10 minutes, I had my hands and my feet and my mouth were buzzing with so much energy and locking up, which is known as technique. And then I went through such an experience that essentially I left my body, not essentially, completely I left my body with utter clarity. And I entered into a state of consciousness that was, I believe, essentially seeing the Godhead, and then returning to my body. When I slipped into my body, it was like getting into a bathtub of shit. And then my body was actually paralyzed for about 10 minutes. I couldn't move, but it was like everything was totally, there was no problem. And then finally I was able to get up, and it was such a, I was 26 at the time, and I looked really young, and as a 26-year-old, and I walked over to this potluck. I was the last person to get up from the circle. A couple people came and checked on me, Finally I got up, and I kind of like maybe even crawled over there. And everybody was sitting down eating, vegetarian food and this whole spread of food. And I remember like everyone looked up at me and they were like, "Oh my God, you look like an angel. You look like a boy. You look like an angel boy glow. Like what?" And I just was like, yeah, like I wanted to go. Like I didn't have there wasn't a framework or vocabulary for what I had just experienced. And it was so powerful, in fact, that I was like, there's no way I'm going to practice that on my own. I'd be terrified to do that on my own. Mm-hmm. So then I finally got into like yoga approach with breath and classical pranayama technique. And I remembered it, but I still thought like, that's like a whole different league of practice. That's like a whole different thing, And then I started kind of seeing like it kind of popped back up occasionally, but I very rarely saw it overlap with like yoga. And then when I began to go through injury stuff, it came back when I was studying the books, the couple of primary books that I read. They never really got into this kind of a breathing pattern that the majority of the kind of the schools of breathwork that have been around since really the 60s get at, right? Which I call connected breathing, and I can talk about that in a second. And I thought like, wow, now that I've studied a lot of these different techniques and I know a little bit more about the body, I want to go back and explore that because that was powerful. I want to see what happens when I do that again. And I would say that was probably 2012 that I saw what I wanted to actually use it to target the pain I was in. And I definitely found that in those years when I was in a lot of pain, when I actually brought myself through 100 or 200 connected breaths, I had to really breathe through a lot of discomfort. But because of the circulation of the breath and the movement of the impact of that kind of dispelling of carbon dioxide on the blood, I would get up and it was like I had less inflammation and less pain. But I wasn't doing this with guidance at the time, and I wasn't, in like a facilitated session. And then I just found that like all of a sudden it started to get really popular, and like Wim Hof's method came onto the scene probably in 2014 or so. And that's such a great method because it's so it doesn't take so long to do it, and people can have such an immediate experience in 10 minutes. And then by the time I got really into it, and I'd done a bunch of sessions kind of approaching different, I went back and I tried Judith's method again, which is transformational breath work. I did other kind of like approaches, like sort of bordering on what's known as holotropic breath work. Rebirthing, I did a bunch of rebirthing sessions, and then I looked into doing the training, and it just so happened that I did a rebirthing training in 2016, which really opened it up for me. I did a facilitator's training in north of Lake Tahoe, and in that there was like 60 people in this training, and every day we would go out to the woods in groups of 3, and you'd either breathe while people watched you breathe until you completed what was known as an energy cycle. You breathe in this connected, gentle but connected pattern, or you'd facilitate and watch somebody breathe. And it was always done with one of the main facilitators. There was like 20 already, there was 20 rebirthers that were there. And so in this training, I learned so much. I learned how to see how people unconsciously push and think that they're going to get somewhere, when actually it's like doing the opposite, and getting gentle with the breath can actually like open up the place that they want to bring themselves to. I saw how the body holds on to so much trauma and so much emotion, and so much experience goes unprocessed, and how when we breathe, it can basically like loosen up and kind of begin to dislodge, and allow those experiences to process. Rebirthing itself was a method that was created by a man named Leonard Orr, who just recently passed in his 90s. And it was in the 60s he created it when he actually had a fascinating story. He created it when he was didn't create it. It was like a download that he received when he was in a hot bath one night, and he wanted to get out of the bath, and he recognized the urge to get out of the bath and to go take care of, mundane tasks. And instead of getting up and going and doing all these things that his mind said, like, you got to go do this stuff, you got to take care of that, like whatever it was, he said, like, no, I'm just going to stay in here. And as he stayed in there longer and longer, this breathing pattern came on in his body, which was a connected breathing pattern, which essentially was the inhale is slightly active, and it's like a wheel that turns inside of you, and the exhale is somewhat passive. So it's like you almost pick up a book and then you drop it, and the book falls to the floor. But before the book hits the floor, it's like you pick the book back up, right? And it's like a wheel of energy that you begin to turn inside of yourself. And this can produce a lot of physical and psychological and energetic response in the body. And as Leonard had this experience, he relived all the trauma of when his mother was pregnant, and he was in the womb, and then his actual birth experience. And then he thought that was wild. So he came out of it almost like accepting what happened as the healing itself. And then he began to teach this to people, and initially he was doing it in like hot tubs. And there was even a time in the 60s when he was doing it where he'd have people put snorkels on and be face down to simulate a womb environment. And people were having radical experiences where they were going through the same kind of thing that he was going through. And that's why he branded it or named it rebirthing. So rebirthing really showed me a lot about the value of like purification practices, and how breath work is in and of itself inherently a purification practice. And it works with the element air. And in rebirthing, one of the perspectives that I got that is so valuable and I think is worth sharing on this podcast is looking at how you incorporate the elements into your life and increasing where you have maybe some lack. So the rebirthing approach was the 5 primary elements that they work with are water. And so the water component is putting your body in water every day and basically communing with that water, right? So whether that's hot or cold water, natural or water that you're drawing a bath in at your house, when you're in the water, you're very aware that that water is the source of life, right? And you allow your body to basically open up and allow the water into it, right, as a cleansing force. Earth and the earth components had to do with, there's two of earth with rebirthing. One is the diet that you eat. And rebirthing really stresses eating a vegan diet. I don't say I follow that. I'm not a vegan. I'm not even a vegetarian. I kind of lean towards being a vegetarian, but the other of the earth sides is actual involvement and engagement with like a natural environment that is void of man-made or man manipulation. So getting your body into, like earthing, for instance, getting your feet in the sand or getting your body in the ocean or getting your body into mountains where there's like open and fresh air and lots of trees and open sky and whatnot. So earth, air, earth. Oh, fire. Fire is a big one. So in rebirthing, they look at consciously feeding a fire as a practice where you can do a day-long fast thing where you feed a fire throughout the day, and you can feed it all the suffering that you have. You're obviously feeding it wood, but like with the water, you commune with the fire and ask it to take that which is a burden from you. And of course, wind, the breath. So using the wind as the breath, and like using the breath as a circulatory force. That just like the wind, it comes and it moves things, and allowing that force to move through your body and really almost to be like an energetic floss on your meridians, and in a way like opening up the valves on the inside of the body as a very powerful cleansing force. And I found that like when I bathe almost every night before I go and do my late night sit before I go to sleep. It's kind of a bit of a tradition, and I breathe every day. I do a breath at least a couple times. I do a focused breath practice every day, even if it's 30 breaths or 100 breaths. And then I'm finding that with practice and over time, it's like my mind has become trained to go to my breath and see how is my breath showing up in this situation, whatever that situation might be, whether it's mundane, like putting money into the ATM or being in the grocery line, or challenging, like I'm in an argument with somebody that cut me off on the freeway. Not that happens, but it has. Or a challenge with my wife, or a difficult parent with the school job that I teach at, or I'm really powerfully engaged with the ocean, or whatever. Yeah, that's been pretty interesting.
Would you mind maybe guiding us through a little connected breathing exercise, just so that listeners at home, or if you're driving, take a pause or reconnect when you get home. But just to walk through what that might look like.
What we can do so people have an immediate and direct experience in a very short way here, and I'll guide you through it, is that we'll do every 5th inhale you'll do long, and you'll breathe through your nose and into your belly. So just let your body relax, and you can close your eyes. And then just notice where there's unconscious tension in your face, especially in your jaw or your cheeks or your temples or your forehead, or maybe even your eyes and perhaps the inside of your mouth, and let those places soften and kind of dissolve. And the same thing like when we started the show. Let the low belly also dissolve, and the floor of the pelvis, let it drop. And then you'll notice that without any effort, the breath is going to be lower down as soon as you relax. And so I'll do the first couple rounds with you, Heather, and you'll hear my pattern, everyone listening, and you'll hear my fingers snap, and that will be a long inhale. So it'll be in and out of the nose, And the fifth inhale will be long. And remember, we're keeping the breath connected. That means that we're putting the mind in the points of transition without allowing for a pause to be there. Also, no force. So this is gentle. So just feel yourself naturally breathe out. And then pick the inhale up through your nose into your belly with me like this. And then let it go. Good. Pick it up. Let it go. And then a long inhale. And let the bubble pop. Keep the breath moving. And just allow the response to happen inside the body. Good. Keep it moving. Pick it up. Let it go. And a long one. And before you're caught at the top, drop it. And one more round. In. And relax. In. Two more. Real gentle. Now real full. And let it go. And let your breath return to normal. And just notice that you might feel some heat in the face. And maybe some percolation or animation in the way your energy feels inside the body right now. If you had any responses where you felt tingling or lightheadedness, that's a temporary thing. And we just embrace it. It's your nervous system saying something's different. And it will find what it perceives as satisfactory levels of carbon dioxide in your system here, right now, basically, as it recalibrates, as the breath pattern returns to normal, and things will feel normal very quickly.
Wow. Yeah, you really do feel that. Doesn't take long.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
Yeah. So someone interested in figuring more out about this or incorporating this more into what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, of course, you may be exposed to it in a class, or you might find a workshop in a studio near you, which is a great way, which is how you started diving in, or books, things like that. But you started doing something really interesting that is making it more accessible to people regardless of where they are and if they have access to it in their home.
I did, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I have an online offering, an online business called Our Breath Collective. OurBreathCollective.com is our website, and we're at Our Breath Collective on Instagram. Myself, my friend and brother Reese Peluso, and my sister Kimberly Johnson all have come together to create an online live weekday 6 a.m. breathing offering that's about 12 minutes of connected breathing to start people's day off with a breath practice. It's a subscription model. We run it right now through Facebook, through a closed group. We do have our Breath Collective page, but that's not the same thing as the group. For people that don't live on the West Coast, obviously the time is 6 a.m. West Coast time, but each day's breathe stays live for 24 hours. So it's there on the page for people to come to and breathe at a time that's convenient for them. We recommend that people do their best to wake up and do it with our community live, which right now has 125 members all over the world, not just in the U.S., all over the U.S., but also in South America and Brazil, in a couple countries in Europe, Hawaii. We have people everywhere. It's really cool. And we're finding that people are finding that there's a lot of magic in committing to waking up and doing simply 12 minutes of live connected breathing each morning. Now, what I just taught is a little bit specific, and the three of us come from different backgrounds. Reese is a Wim Hof instructor. Kimberly, like me, has done a rebirthing training and is in the world of trauma and the world of somatics. She wrote a book called The Fourth Trimester. She's fairly well known and really brilliant. So she looks at targeting so many different systems, particularly the nervous system. And then I come from a variety of, like a compilation of pranayama and meditation and rebirthing approach. So it's different every day. It's a really powerful way for people to learn about different modalities and approaches with breath, but more importantly, to learn about themselves and to learn how they can work with their nervous system in a positive way to enhance the quality of their presence each day, their energy, and this in turn, results in increased satisfaction in relationships, increased satisfaction in job and sides of life that are challenging, tools to handle how to work with difficult emotions and difficult situations and difficult people. And it runs quite a gamut. It's also really nice to be a part of this Sangha that's growing and feels very interconnected and very close and open and communicative with one another. Yeah, so that is the most immediate line. Please go follow our Instagram page. At the end of each month, we open our collective up. We close it on the 5th day of each month for that month to kind of have a sealed container. And then we reopen it around the start of the last week of the month. And we offer live breathes on Instagram. In our story, you can see it as a live breathe in the morning, so people can get a taste and an experience of what it is that we offer.
Great. So definitely go check that out.
Yeah.
And get access to this wherever you are. Gotta love technology.
Yeah. Yeah, that was part of this idea was it's not so easy anymore just to say to offer like workshops all the time, but everybody's on their phones and we all know that when we wake up it's very hard not to just go to your phone, especially if you're using it for your alarm clock. And then all of a sudden you're already in the black hole of like, I've already checked my email and social media. I'm already like kind of been infiltrated by it today, and when we thought, why not go through the phones and give people this offering in the comfort of their own homes at 6 a.m. It's quite powerful.
Yeah, I can't wait to join one.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back to Zen. So for someone who hasn't heard of Zen work, how would you describe Zen compared to maybe other meditations people have been exposed to? And what is that approach like? And how has that become an impactful part of your process?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a question. What is Zen is like a massive one, right? And actually, one answer would be what isn't Zen. Nothing isn't Zen itself when we really get into it. People talk about the word, like, use the word Zen like, oh, it's like the Zen zone, or it's so Zen right now. But when somebody's really angry, that's pretty Zen too. And when somebody's being very authentic in their expression, that is Zen. And yet somehow when somebody's being very inauthentic in their expression, that too is Zen. So to back it up though, Zen is a Buddhist approach or a Buddhist perspective that draws from the teachings of Buddha himself and uses examples of awakened masters in China and in Japan, typically, and their encounters with and interactions with students or monks, and how these awakening experiences happened. And essentially it looks at what is this being human? What is this whole thing? I am not at an authorized level to begin even like trying to explain what it really is that Zen points at. But my experience has been that working with my teacher Henry for 5 years, I've been in a committed training, if you want to call it that, where I go a couple times a year and I do a retreat, which is known as sesshin. Sesshin is a Japanese word that means touching of the heart. And essentially these are silent retreats where we do about 10 hours a day of meditation. You do have each day the opportunity to go into a kind of a room with the teacher and do what's called dakusan. Dakusan means interview. And in that interview, in my lineage, in my school, which is known as Sanbo Zen, we do what's called koan study, Koan. Koans are like little parables or little phrases, and some people know some, such as, what is the sound of one hand? Everyone thinks it's the sound of what is the sound of one hand clapping, but it's the sound of one hand. I mean, it's the same thing. What is the sound of one hand clapping, right? But in the experience I've had, I go into the Zendo room with Henry alone, and he says, okay, so I state the koan, and then he says, okay, tell me, what do you think it is? And not logically, but I explain what I've come to find it to mean, and then he says, good, show me. And so you have to present on how it means, and it's in a way, quite a powerful and profound practice, because it breaks the logical side of the brain. Because there's no doubt about it, Zen goes beyond logic and beyond concept. And I've had the good fortune of having some very, very deep experiences with what Zen points at in the context of being on retreat and then being in the context of meditation, but also outside of that context. Zen itself came from a guy named Bodhidharma, who was an Indian man who brought the teachings of the Buddha from India through Southeast Asia and into China and in Japan. And when he got into some of these regions in the 4th and 5th century, when it was that he came through there, I believe it was 5th century, he encountered people who were practicing Taoism. And Taoism looks at nature, and nature as the way of things. And this is exactly actually what the Tao Te Ching begins to point at. Look at nature and see how it flows and how it's interconnected and harmonious. And a lot of Buddha's teachings kind of like overlapped and aligned with Taoism. So Zen, in a way, was the meeting place between Taoism and Buddhism. And I found it to be remarkably powerful, because it's allowed me the opportunity to ask the questions that have always been there, but I didn't know how to have a framework or vocabulary around asking, such as the question of who am I, or what is this, or even deeper, why is this, or what do I do about this in these times it's such an important thing to ask. What do I do about this? It's such a heavy time of change and transition and suffering and looming, darkness, destruction, and acceptance, like the need for acceptance and action. I think that's the best I can do to kind of summarize Zen. It is different than other meditation approaches. Prior to Zen, I had 5 years with this approach called Transcendental Meditation. And that Transcendental Meditation uses, it's the teachings of Maharishi. Well, the Beatles kind of popularized Maharishi. Like, they got into it, they got into him. And then TM was really big here in the States. And TM uses a mantra. So a mantra, Ram Dass gave this wonderful definition of the word mantra as a mind protectant. So anything, you can use any kind of sound as a mantra, but typically it's a positive sound, right? So like the word love could be a mantra. You can just say love over and over. The breath itself could be a mantra if you can hear your inner voice saying, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out, or inhale, exhale. But in TM, they use mantras that are typically words that are sacred words taken from the Rig Veda. And you receive one from a teacher in a ceremony. And it's kind of like a very, very personal thing. And you place the mantra in the space of meditation over and over again. And it is believed to bring about, to have the potential at least to bring about a transcendent experience. Yeah. So I sat with TM for a long time. My mantra still surfaces from time to time. But I found Zen, and it really allowed me the opportunity to have these investigative questions about really that kind of came to, how do I make my life better? How do I make my life better to help make the lives of others around me better? And how do I find more peace and satisfaction? How do I squeeze more juice out of this fruit of the planet, of the life, of the human being? Wow. Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
All right. Well, last two questions that I'll ask on the show, and I'd love for you to share with our listeners. Is there a 10-minute tip that you would suggest people try at home so that they might find a little more mind, body, and spirit balance today?
My 10-minute tip. On the spot 10-minute tip. Yeah, I would tell people to do 100 breaths, which would take them about 4 and a half, maybe 5 minutes, connected in the way that we just breathe, but without the fifth inhale long. And the mind's going to wander. The mind's going to run from that and just come back. And you'll feel a lot with 100 breaths that way. And don't push or don't force. And see how your mind works in that period. And if you lose count, then you just come back to about where you think you were when you recognize that the mind has gone into some train of thought about something that's probably not here, right? In the present moment, at least. And once you have done those 100 breaths, sit with and observe. Let yourself stay for 5 minutes. You can set a timer, right? And count 100 breaths. Set a timer for a 10-minute countdown. Once you've done the 100 breaths, open up to the 3 dominant senses inside of the experience. So inside of your body, which will inevitably be also the environment that's immediately outside of your body. And those 3 dominant senses, in no particular order, are your hearing, that which is the types of sounds that are bubbling up from the environment, outside of your home or space that you're doing this in, or inside of the walls, the ambient sounds of the house, or the ticking of your clock, if you have that. And then inside of the inside of the skin, the inside of the bag of skin, that we seem to find the yolk inside of the shell, so to speak. Sound, what you see. Obviously, your eyes are going to be closed, but notice kind of some of the sensation or maybe the colors or dots or spots or vibrations of eyes closed, the backs of the eyelids, the tops of the eye sockets, the space between the eyebrows, almost like the dome of the head, then dropping down into from where the neck plugs into the torso, and then the openness of the lungs and the space inside of the torso, and then the whole thing. And then lastly, the feeling, right? The general way that the body feels, which will have a component of breath moving in it. In a relaxed way, open up to feeling, and you'll start to feel the environment around you. And then you'll notice that the feeling overlaps with both seeing and hearing as you get really open with presence and wakefulness in this kind of an experience, if you've manipulated breathing in this way. And then once that 10-minute timer goes up, I would say whatever it is, the first thing you go do, pay particular attention to all of the details, and notice that they'll show up probably with a little bit more high definition, but let yourself slow down and really take in the tastes or touch or sights or smells of whatever it is you encounter. Whether you go make a cup of tea or you go get ready for work or take a shower, right? And then see if you can expand that little bit of greater mind openness into the day each time you go about this. Quick 10-minute practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sounds great. Yeah. Definitely going to try that. And finally, in honor of the show title, Yoga for Balance, what does balance feel like, look like to you?
Well, balance to me has, each day I have a bookend of meditation. So the first thing that I do when I wake up is I do a 25 to 45 minute, depending on the morning, sit. This is typically at 5 a.m. Since our Breath Collective starts at 6. And each day ends with a meditation. So these are the last two things I do. And I find this brings a great deal of equilibrium, right? In those meditations, I don't think about what's going to happen today, what I want to have happen today, unless there's something that's really like pervasive and important or causing me to think about it. Or rather, I don't use the meditation as a means to like organize my day necessarily. I do notice that the thoughts will sometimes go there, but again, I kind of like allow the whole space to open up. And then the same thing at the end of the day. I find that, balance for me has to do with like consistency with the way that I eat, what I eat, and doing some form of activity at least most days of the week that's outside of the scope of, I like to get into the ocean, truthfully. It's harder and harder to do consistently. I probably get in the ocean 3 times a week at most now. And I like to move my body. So I do an asana practice publicly maybe a couple times a month now. But I still do get into my body for 5 to 7 minutes most days. Sometimes in my lunch break, I have a yoga mat in my classroom, and I'll roll it out and just kind of do, like, sometimes I just hold down dog for 5 minutes. And subtle movements, bending the knees. But some kind of simple movement where my breath comes online in a more animated way than it would were I just sitting at my computer or something like that. Right. And then lastly, of course, like for me, my balance has to do with like being connected with my wife and spending time with my wife and our dog. We have a beautiful dog named Rupert. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so great, so much amazing information, and I really appreciate the work you do that I've experienced in person, and to know that you're able to reach even more people through this new online collective. It's amazing. Definitely go check that out. And I appreciate your time for you being here and sharing this with our Yoga for Balance listeners.
Thanks for having me, Heather. I can be found on Instagram at LWZEN, LWZen, and of course our Breath Collective. And I have a website which is LukeWientzen.com, LukeWientzen.com. Maybe you add this in your comments at the end or something. So
yeah, perfect. Yeah, I'll link that up in the show notes so you can access all of the websites and check out all the great work that Luke is doing.
And if I could just say one more thing.
Absolutely.
The real value that I see in all of the stuff that we're talking about is that it brings about more ability to see the world with the eyes of love and to spread kind of compassion and empathy and understanding. And recently I learned this thing, the last thing I want to say that's so valuable, this technique called zoom in, zoom out. I deal with high school age kids. And so I deal with a lot of difficult attitudes and behaviors, as you can imagine, and the cell phones have made it even more of a world of, all self-consumed narcissism almost, right? But when I find difficult situations, whether it's with a high school age kid or with parents or with a colleague or with a friend or anything, I intend to apply this zoom in, zoom out. So I zoom into how I feel, and that's where the breath becomes so imperative, because a lot of the times the breath is not really moving, or it's kind of like really high up my chest. So by relaxing the body and letting the breath move, you actually can kind of regain some semblance of control with like regulating the emotional response, especially in difficult situations that you're feeling. And then I zoom out and I think about, for a moment, where is this person coming from and what might their life be like? And then we see that there's a common ground, that everybody is fighting that battle, that they're the only one that knows about it. It's just so hard to remember that when somebody's being difficult or when you're having a rough day. And to land in this space of the heart and then live from this space of the heart is no easy task. And that's why we have these practices. So I hope you're able to apply them and bring forth the love in the world, because we sure need it.
Thanks, Luke.
Sure. Thanks, Heather.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Luke. You can find all of the show notes at vintantra.com, vintantra.com. And please do help this show grow by sharing this episode. You could take a screenshot wherever you listen and share it to your Instagram stories, and tag Vintantra and Yoga for Balance podcast so that other people can learn about these episodes as well. And if you are on your podcast app, don't forget to subscribe as well as leave a star rating and review while you're there. Until next time.